Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show. I'm your host, Sara Banta. I'm a health coach, natural supplement expert, and a busy mom of three. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below so you're notified every week with my new podcasts on Mondays and Tuesdays. And if you haven't already, join my free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. There is no downside. I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health, and you will be a part of a like-minded group to support you on your journey, in addition to truly taking control of your health. The protocols and supplements I discuss are all found at sarabantahealth.com. And today you are definitely going to want to join the free group coaching to follow up on all of the aha moments that we're going to get into today with our guest, Dr. Rick Johnson. I'm super excited to have him on. He's a professor of medicine at the University of Colorado and is a clinician, educator, and researcher. He's board certified in internal medicine, infectious diseases, and kidney disease, and is the founding editor of Comprehensive Clinical Nephrology, one of the main textbooks on kidney disease. And you wonder, how is kidneys related to insulin resistance? Well, we're going to get into that as well. For more than 20 years, he's led research on the cause of obesity and diabetes, with special interest in the role of sugar, especially fructose and uric acid. Welcome. How are you, Rick, today?
Thank you. It's great to be on your show, Sara.
I'm super excited because no one thinks about fructose versus glucose and maybe gout and uric acid and how are they all related. And we are now in a time where I believe more than 80 to 90% of people have insulin resistance, prediabetes, or diabetes. And I would love for your statistic on that. But what is the hidden cause? So we're going to get into it. And why don't we start with uric acid? What is it?
Yeah. So, we're all well aware of, protein, carbohydrates, and fat, but there's another component to our diet, which is, the things that make up DNA and RNA and the nucleic acids in our cells and what creates energy. And all these things come from nucleic acids or nucleic acid derivatives. And uric acid is the breakdown product when nucleic acids are broken down. So when we eat, you're getting protein, fat, carbohydrates, but you're also getting like nuclei, so like plants and animals have proteins they have nuclei in the meat and in the plants, and these nucleus contains DNA and RNA, and when that's broken down, it generates uric acid. And so uric acid is basically a breakdown product that we make a fair amount of uric acid, and everybody has some uric acid in their blood as well as in their tissues. And so it turns out that this is a substance you can measure, just like you can measure cholesterol, you can measure your uric acid. And the uric acid turns out to be important in obesity.
Well, you mentioned that you can measure it, and this is something that is not necessarily measured by your doctor unless you come in with complaints of gout. And so I want to emphasize this for all of you out there who want to get their blood panels done. Check the box for uric acid. And
Absolutely.
If your doctor says, I'm not going to do it, go find another doctor or do it on your own. You can go to directlabs.com or any other lab company and do it on your own. But this is an important number. So we're going to talk about what happens when your uric acid is too high, but what is too high? What numbers should we be looking for?
Okay, so the uric acid in the blood can vary quite a bit. And it can vary from a kind of a low number would be like 3 or 2 milligrams per deciliter. But, you know, the number to remember is like 3. And when it gets high, it can go over 10. And, you know, when it's really high, it can actually precipitate and form crystals in the body. And when it does, these crystals typically form in the joints, particularly the big toe. And it causes the disease gout, which is an arthritis. It's a type of joint pain that typically involves the big toe or the ankle or the wrist or the knee. And it's very painful. It's these crystals, when they form of uric acid, they are very inflammatory and they cause a red hot joint, fever, a lot of pain. And so about 9 million people suffer from gout. And this is from this high uric acid when it precipitates and forms crystals. So, it's been known for centuries that uric acid can cause disease, that it causes the disease gout. And so gout is actually very, very commonly associated with obesity and with metabolic syndrome and with insulin resistance and with kidney disease and with high blood pressure. And so most people with gout actually have a dramatically increased risk for having heart disease and obesity and diabetes. And so there has been long known to be an association. What's new is that more and more studies have shown that the uric acid doesn't just cause gout, but it can actually contribute to causing obesity and diabetes and insulin resistance. And in animals, if you raise uric acid, they will develop, insulin resistance and fatty liver and a little bit of kidney disease and high blood pressure. So the uric acid probably is not simply the cause of gout, but actually has a role in these other diseases. And my research has tried to find out why that is and how it works. And that took us to actually, of all things, it took us to sugar, because one of the main issues when you eat sugar is that sugar actually makes uric acid. When you eat sugar, it actually stimulates the production of uric acid in the body.
What's so interesting is I'm sure anyone out there listening who has gout, their doctors have probably told them to stop eating some of the proteins and, stop drinking alcohol, which of course that I agree with. But they're not addressing the big elephant in the room, and that's fructose.
Right.
So let's talk about how uric acid contributes to obesity and then the role of fructose in that equation.
Sure. So anyway, but getting back to your point, there are 3 types of foods that can raise uric acid. One is alcohol, and alcohol causes a breakdown of ATP, which is an energy substance. And when that happens, you can generate uric acid. So when you drink a beer in particular is the one that's the most strongly associated with uric acid. If you drink a beer, your body will start producing uric acid within 30, 40 minutes. And then the second one are these things called purines. And purines are the substances in meats and plants that are important in nucleic acids. And so when you eat a high purine diet, you can generate uric acid as well. And the classic ones are things like shellfish, like shrimp and lobster. They're like the most famous for generating uric acid. But the big Banta or whatever, the one that the one that you're talking about, the big elephant in the room, is sugar. And sugar is a carbohydrate, but it turns out that it consists of glucose and fructose bound together. And when those two sugars are bound together, it makes up table sugar. And table sugar, when you eat it, it breaks down to this glucose and fructose. And fructose is unique in that it causes a degradation of ATP, somewhat like alcohol. So, sugar and alcohol have a lot in common. And when you eat sugar, the fructose breaks down ATP, and that generates uric acid. And that can happen within minutes. So it was known back in the 1890s, a long time ago, that besides eating, rich foods and alcohol, that gout could be precipitated by eating sugar. And sweets were considered in port wines and sweet wines and alcohol type can stimulate uric acid production. So it's been known for a long time that fructose and sugar can stimulate uric acid production and induce gout. So my work was really interested in the actions of uric acid, because everyone was saying, well, you know what, uric acid is really a waste product. It's a waste product from these nucleic acids, and we get rid of it. And yes, when the concentrations go up, it can form crystals and cause gout, but it's not in itself, doing anything except being a waste product. And in our group, discovered that uric acid is actually biologically active, and so it turns out that it actually has a role in activating the processes that cause obesity and diabetes. And what we found was that the uric acid, when it builds up inside the cell, it acts on our energy factories. And our body makes energy. When we eat food, we make energy, of course. And so that energy is called ATP. And that's the active energy we use. And if we store energy, it's in the form of fat. And so there's really two forms of energy. There's the energy we store, which is like fat and glycogen or starch. In plants, it's starch, and animals, it's glycogen. But we can store energy, or we can make energy. And then the energy the active energy is called ATP. And what we found was that the uric acid affects the production of this active energy, and it reduces the amount of active energy that's produced, so that the food that we eat is actually turned into fat. So it actually helps stimulate fat by preventing the body from making the active energy and instead making more stored energy. And that's how fructose works.
What's really interesting, and I want to emphasize, is I talk a lot about ATP and energy, or true cellular energy, not the energy from coffee or a Monster drink, but that true cellular energy. And here we are eating fructose, eating food, and it's stealing our energy, right? So we're not getting out of it from what we want, but it's triggering an addiction to our brain. And I try to tell my kids this. So my daughters are athletes, but they too will want to have an apple juice instead of the apple to get that quick energy for their workout. And I tell them, that's actually stealing your energy. You're not going to perform as well. And your body's going to tell your brain that you need more food to gain more ATP or more true energy, because all of that fructose is just going straight to fat or fatty liver, right? And causing insulin resistance and all of the metabolic issues. But there's this disconnect of what our brain is telling our body and what our body's telling our brain as far as energy goes. So if you want to touch on that or really dive into it, I think this is a super important concept for people to understand. And this is why when you are eating a lot of processed foods with a lot of fructose, you keep eating a lot of food with fructose because you're addicted, and your brain is saying, well, I need more food because I'm not getting what I want from it, right?
Yeah. So let me tell you the story behind this, because as you say, it's really, really interesting. And it kind of gave a clue, a major clue into what causes obesity. So, classically, people have said, well, the reason you get fat is because you're eating too much and you're exercising too little. And there's some truth to that, because people are eating more and they're exercising less. And so it really made sense. But the truth is that most animals, if they eat more one day, they'll eat less the next. If they they'll burn the energy that they eat, and they'll regulate their weight. So animals in the wild will completely regulate their weight. During the summer, they even if they don't get food for a while, they'll conserve their energy. And then when they get their food, they'll maintain their weight. And we have a whole hormonal system that is supposed to do this. It's called the leptin system, and it regulates what we call satiety. So it tells us when we're full and so forth. But people today have lost that regulation, and many of them are resistant to the effects of leptin, which is this hormone that tries to keep our weight in check. And so the question is, why is that happening? And it turned out that we figured a lot of this out from studies in the wild and studies of animals in the wild, because, nature can teach us a lot. And so some animals will purposely gain weight, and they will gain weight at set times of the year to help them, survive winter, for example. So like a hibernating bear will, 2 months or a month and a half before it hibernates, will suddenly lose its ability to regulate its weight. And it's like hungry all the time. And it starts eating pounds and, it'll gain 10 pounds a day. I mean, that's how much it will do it. And during the summer, it's like maintaining its weight. And then like in the fall, suddenly it starts to gain weight. Unbelievably, it keeps eating more and more than it needs. And it just stores all this fat. And then it will hibernate, and then it will burn the fat while it's hibernating as the energy to provide the energy it needs, so that it doesn't need to find food. It's going to live off its fat. And they don't just become fat, they'll become insulin resistant too, because when you become insulin resistant, you help maintain higher glucose levels in the blood. And that helps feed the brain when you're during the winter in the hibernation. You can have that glucose fuel for the brain, as well as for other tissues. And so it sort of starves the muscle, which is what insulin resistance does. It reduces the amount of glucose going to the muscle and sort of saves it for the brain, because of course you want to be able to maintain adequate energy to the brain. So the hibernating animal actually gets fat. It doesn't just put fat in its tissues; it puts fat in the adipose tissue. It collects fat in the liver, and it collects fat in the blood, and becomes insulin resistant. And all these features that we call the metabolic syndrome, that we think of as a disease state. We're actually pre-diabetic, and all these things, and we check ourselves and we say, "Oh my God, we're in trouble." And yet here's a bear trying to do it and to survive. It's like a survival pathway. And so the question is, what triggers that survival pathway, and how does it work? And our work suggested that it's primarily fructose that does this. And what fructose does, which is different from all other nutrients, is it generates this uric acid that then lowers the ATP in the cell, and the uric acid does it by causing oxidative stress to those energy factories. And so when it causes that, the energy factories make less ATP, so more of the energy is passed into the fat. And so this is how it works. And it's true, other foods that generate uric acid can do this as well, but fructose is the classic one that lowers the ATP in the cell and triggers this. Now, so when it lowers the ATP, it's like an alarm signal. The animal feels like it doesn't have enough energy. And so it triggers all these chemical reactions that lead to fat accumulation, fat production, a reduction in energy metabolism so that you reduce your energy metabolism so you don't burn as much. So it's not just, purposefully reducing exercise. Your resting energy metabolism actually drops, and that helps conserve energy and make you gain more weight. And it's all there to help you, because you're thinking that you're in a low energy state, and you are in a low ATP state, but all that extra energy is turning into fat or stored energy. So your total energy is high. It's just that you're putting it in the fat. And at the same time, fructose blocks the ability to mobilize the energy from the fat. So you're putting this energy into the fat, but you're not taking it out, because it wants to help expand the fat so that you are going to survive when there's no food around. So that's why these animals do it. And we're eating sugar because we've learned to love sugar. It's part of our evolution to like this food because it's supposed to help us survive. But now we're not just waiting for the fruits to ripen in the fall. We are actually, buying table sugar and high fructose corn syrup and putting it in our foods. And most of our foods have a lot of sugar and salt and fat. And so now we've got that fructose, and it's activating this biologic switch. And then we're getting hungry from it. We're eating more, and bingo, that's how it's working.
So this is the survival switch that you talk about in your book, that nature wants us to be fat, right? And so I want to emphasize it, that it's like all of these things, not just through one mechanism, but you're increasing your fat storage, you're lowering your metabolism, you're lowering the ATP and the energy, so you don't want to move because you don't have the energy to move. And then you have that increased oxidative stress. Robert Lustig talks about how there are two diseases that really weren't around in children before 1980, and that's insulin resistance and fatty liver disease. And so this is where I want to talk about the fatty liver and how is that related to uric acid, and then also how is that related to obesity?
Yes. So fatty liver is part of this metabolic syndrome. So when, back before there was there's huge increase in sugar intake that occurred in the 70s. In the 1970s, high fructose corn syrup was introduced, and suddenly the amount of sugar we were eating went up by 40% or so. And when that happened, we're eating so much sugar in high fructose corn syrup that we're getting a lot of fructose, and especially like in soft drinks. And one of the main things that fructose does is it doesn't just increase the fat in the tissues, it increases fat in the blood, and it increases it in the liver. It's all part of that survival system. So bears will, for example, get very fatty liver, and hummingbirds that drink nectar get very fatty livers during the day. And so fatty liver is part of this metabolic syndrome. And when the metabolic syndrome and obesity really took off in the 1970s and 80s, suddenly we started seeing people developing really bad fatty liver to the point that they started getting severe liver disease and what we call cirrhosis and liver failure. And it was from this quote non-alcoholic fatty liver. And because alcohol can also cause liver disease. It's well known to cause liver disease, and it also causes fat in the liver. And so it was known that alcohol could do it, but suddenly people were seeing that sugar and carbs were doing it. And our group was the first group to identify sugar and high fructose corn syrup as a driver of this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And if you give sugar to an animal, they get fatty liver very quickly. And if you raise uric acid in an animal, they will get fatty liver. And so there is this very strong association between the two. And so it's, this fatty liver is a major component along with type 2 diabetes that we're seeing. And as it's become a bigger problem, and especially with like soft drinks where you get a large concentration of fructose very quickly, we're seeing fatty liver and type 2 diabetes in children. And so when Rob and I were in the early part of our careers, it was still pretty rare to see a type 2 diabetic kid. Type 1 diabetes was very common because, it's a different mechanism. But the type 2 diabetes is the one that's associated with obesity. And suddenly we started seeing children with type 2 diabetes and with high blood pressure and with all the features of metabolic syndrome. And we did one study, and one of the problems with sugar is the more sugar you drink, the more sensitive you become to it, the more you absorb it. So we did a study in 14-year-olds who had fatty liver, biopsy proven, as well as children who were obese, as well as children who were lean. And we found that when we gave them a dose of sugar, especially of fructose, that the kids that had fatty liver absorbed pretty much all the fructose all at once. Whereas the kids that were lean, many of them malabsorbed the fructose. They only absorbed a bit of it. And the kids that were overweight but did not have fatty liver were in between. And the reason for that is that when you eat sugar, or initially, you don't absorb that much. But the more you eat, and especially the more fructose you eat, the more you absorb more of it. So these children who had fatty liver had been eating a lot of sugar, so they absorbed the fructose very rapidly. And so it's sort of a trap. What's happened is, a lot of kids are being given fruit juice. Parents think that they're healthy because fruit's supposed to be healthy, where natural fruits are healthy. But fruit juice is not, because it's like concentrated sugar, and you're removing a lot of the fiber and things like that when you drink the juice. So you get a large amount of sugar without all the good things like the fibers and and also things like vitamin C and other things that are in natural fruit are really, really good. But a lot of times, a lot of the good things are taken out when you remove the pulp and the fiber. And so it turns out that fruit juice is much more serious a problem than natural fruit. In fact, we did studies with natural fruit, and even though they have some fructose, the vitamin C and the flavonols and the epicatechin and all these good things actually counter the effects of fructose. So natural fruits if you have a natural fruit, that's good. But if you take like 5 fruit and suddenly that 3 to 4 grams of fructose per fruit now becomes 15 grams, and you drink it really fast, you're going to get that big dose of fructose, and you're going to get that ATP depletion, and you're going to trigger this switch.
So I want you all to see how many pieces of fruit makes up your 8 ounces of juice, and try to eat all of those pieces of fruit without throwing up, because I don't think you will be able to, because nature gives us that fiber and the other elements to the fruit to stop us from eating too much, right? And I have a little story with my youngest daughter, who is an athlete, like I mentioned, and she has a hard time getting enough protein in. But she's taking something called perfect aminos, which is just amino acids, right, to support her muscle building. And she said, Mom, it's weird. Now that I'm just taking these pills, I'm not craving as much carbohydrates after my workout. And that's because your gut registers how much amino acids it's getting in to tell your brain, okay, I've gotten enough nutrition. I'm good. I need to shut off my appetite. Whereas when you're just eating the carbs and the sugar, it's your brain saying, I need more, I need more, I need more. And then you have this cascade of issues where you need more of the fructose, and then you have the metabolic disease, and then it's just this vicious cycle that is building on each other. So I thought that was really interesting just in my own household. And believe me, my kids will tell me when I'm wrong. They tell me when I don't know what I'm talking about. So that was very interesting. I wanted to get into the polyol pathway and how that is related to uric acid, because this is really interesting to me. And I had never heard of it before reading your book.
Yeah. So originally I was like interested in, uric acid, and I knew that fructose could raise uric acid. And so we started giving fructose to animals, and we found that fructose could induce all these features of metabolic syndrome. And that if we lowered the uric acid, we could protect the animals to some extent from this metabolic syndrome, that the uric acid was having a role. And so then I thought, the problem is really sugar and high fructose corn syrup. And that's the main problem. And I even wrote a book, The Sugar Fix, some years ago, in which we really tried to argue that it was the fructose was the primary driver of the metabolic syndrome and of obesity. And we had a lot of data supporting that. But then we had this very bad discovery. And the bad discovery was that carbs in general, could also produce fructose. And you didn't have to eat fructose, but the body can make fructose from glucose. And things like French fries, which I knew weren't good, didn't have fructose in it, but they obviously could cause obesity. And when we studied it, we found that the mechanism was largely because the potatoes were, a lot of the starch was being converted to fructose. And it wasn't just this glucose insulin pathway, which is important. Glucose stimulates insulin. Insulin can drive fat. That is an important pathway, but it turns out that the main mechanism driving obesity appears to be through this fructose pathway. And when you eat potatoes and rice and bread, all these things that we, these high glycemic carbs, it turns out that a lot of them are converted to fructose in the body. And then the fructose generates uric acid. And the uric acid may not go up in the blood so much, but it's going up inside your cells and triggering this event, this switch. So as soon as we realized that, then it was like, oh my God, it isn't just the fructose we eat, but the body can make fructose from high glycemic carbs. And this really emphasized why low carb diets are so helpful, and high protein diets tend to be helpful, because the low carb diet is reducing not just the amount of fructose we eat, but the glucose we eat. And by reducing the glucose we eat, it actually reduces the amount of fructose that we make, because you can only make fructose from glucose. And then we had another kind of exciting, and the mechanism by which glucose is turned to fructose is this polyol pathway. So there's two enzymes. There's one that's really important, and that enzyme converts glucose to sorbitol, and then sorbitol gets converted to fructose. And bad news, sorbitol is sometimes used as an artificial sweetener. Don't believe that it's an artificial sweetener. It actually can get converted to fructose in your body. So if you see sorbitol, don't think of it as being healthy in any way. It's and you can give sorbitol animals, and they just make fructose, and it's it's not good. So anyway, but getting back to this, what we found was that the body can make fructose from glucose, and it goes through this pathway called the polyol pathway. And the polyol pathway is stimulated by a high glycemic carb diet or high carb diet. So when you're on a high carb diet, you are just going to be making fructose even if you're not eating it. But there's a particular stimulant that helps convert the glucose to fructose, and that turns out to be salt. And when you eat salt, it raises the salt concentration in your blood, and that triggers this enzyme to get active, and it helps convert the glucose to the fructose. And that's why salted French fries are much worse than unsalted French fries, because the salt is helping to stimulate the conversion of that glucose to fructose. And so what we did is we took animals and we just put them on a high salt diet, thinking that, well, what if we just activate this enzyme? Will the animals become fat just from eating salt? And so when we put them on their normal diet, these laboratory rats were on their normal chow, but if we increased the salt in their food, they became hungrier, they started eating more, and they became fat, and they developed diabetes and the whole thing. And it was quite amazing. And then if we blocked that polyol reaction, they could still eat the salt, but they didn't get fat. And so that reaction that drives the glucose to fructose was responsible for why these animals were getting fat. So then what we did is we looked at people who are overweight, and we found that a lot of them are eating not just too much sugar, but and not too much carbs, but they're also eating too much salt. And salt is the other major ingredient in processed foods. It's sugar and salt and fat. Those are the things that people like, and those things help stimulate the production of fructose. So especially the sugar and the salt. So that's sort of how it works. And then we realized that we could block this pathway by giving water. And so if you drink water and prevent that salt concentration from going up, you could protect animals from obesity. So the old rule about drinking 8 glasses of water a day is actually true. If you drink a fair amount of water, you can block this process of trying to make fructose in your body, or at least reduce the amount made. I would not drink gallons and gallons of water, but the rule of 8 to 10 glasses of water a day is generally a very good rule.
Well, that's really interesting that if uric acid is blocked while consuming the fructose, then the obesity, the high triglycerides, and the hypertension don't occur.
Yes, you can definitely block the process with hydration to some extent, and also by lowering the uric acid. Both of those approaches work.
One thing I wanted to bring up with my research over the last 3 years, and I have to be careful with how I speak about this, but with the spike protein infiltrating itself into all of us, regardless of what side of the equation you're on, is that there's been a dysregulation of insulin. There's been an increase in triglycerides and cholesterol in the liver. And there's also been the spike protein actually chelates copper at an accelerated rate out of the body, but then add to it this increase in fructose in the diets. The natural metabolism of fructose causes massive copper chelation. And I know you've talked to Morley Robbins a bit about this. And that low bioavailable copper causes liver iron accumulation, which then leads or adds into, sorry about the phone there, the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And then that low copper also causes the high triglycerides and cholesterol. So I was wondering if you've seen this happen and these numbers increase over the last 3 years from what's been going on in society.
Well, this whole story about copper is very, very interesting. Now, I myself, as a scientist, have not personally studied this, but copper is really important in energy production. And Marley's right that copper, it plays a role in the generation of ATP. So, and it turns out that copper deficiency can reduce the production of ATP. And so it's very similar to how fructose works. And Marley sent me papers showing that fructose can actually lower copper levels, affect copper. So it could well be that this is all part of the same story, that basically, if you want to be as healthy as you can be, you want to have really good ATP stores. And it's been shown that people with obesity and diabetes have low ATP levels in their liver, low ATP levels in their muscle. Dementia is associated with low ATP levels in the brain. Aging is kind of a low ATP state. We don't want to have low ATP. We want to have the energy we want to be able to do the things we want to give us that vigor. And but if you want to store fat, you want to lower the ATP because it's going to be like a stimulus to eat. Well, that may be true if you're an animal preparing for hibernation, but in our society, we don't want to be eating in excess all the time. It's just going to get us into more and more trouble. It's going to drop our energy. We're going to get fat. It's going to affect our ability to think. It's going to lead to diabetes. So we want to try to maintain our ATP levels. We do not want to reduce them. And so things like sugar and high fructose corn syrup, we're just eating too much of it. We have to reduce that. We need to cut back on those high glycemic carbs like bread and rice and potatoes. We need to cut back on salt. All these foods are there to help stimulate fructose, and we don't want to have too much fructose. It's not like we don't want to have any. I'm not telling you never to eat sugar or never to eat potatoes or rice. I'm just saying we're eating too much of it, and we need to cut back. And yes, if you can go on a low carb diet or a keto diet, you're going to see some amazing results. I have a diet in my book that I talk about, and Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, and it kind of summarizes the foods that we think are good and the ones that we think can activate this pathway. And so there are nuances to it, but basically, if we could cut back on carbs, high protein foods generally are better for satiety, actually. But if they make a lot of uric acid, that will neutralize some of those benefits. So you want to watch your uric acid. The goal is to have it like under 6, ideally under 5. 4 to 5 is like perfect. And if it's like 10, you're in trouble. You have like an 80% chance of being obese if it's like 10. So, so I would measure your uric acid, try to cut back on sugar, drink more water. There's so many things we can do to keep our health.
I love everything you're saying, and your book is amazing. Like I said, I had to listen to it and read it because I enjoyed it, and there's so many good nuggets in it. And I wanted to end with, okay, everyone's sitting there going, this sounds great. I have all of these metabolic diseases, but how do I get off the fructose because I'm addicted to it? And, Rick, we're going to have you back on and get into the addiction part of it. But that's where I have tried to come up with supplements that help make things easy. So then you go, oh, I can do this. Because as you were talking about obesity and then becoming sedentary, well, if you have high uric acid from your fructose and that's lowering your energy, then you're going to be sedentary, right? Because you don't have energy.
Exactly.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Are you sedentary first and you get fat, or are you eating the wrong foods and it's making you sedentary? So then there's this vicious cycle. So anyways, there's a couple supplements I wanted to just touch on, and that's the accelerated scalar copper. So as we know, your copper is being depleted, and it's super important for the energy production in ATP. But the accelerated scalar copper is 100% bioavailable versus most others are only 5 to 10%. And it's made with the proprietary scalar technology to enhance the efficacy and the absorption. But the copper blocks that polyol pathway, which is responsible for converting glucose into sorbitol and fructose. And because of this mechanism, uric acid can stay in check, and fat gain and obesity can be prevented. And without copper, not only does uric acid and fat gain increase, but the triglycerides and the liver fat increase. And the fatty liver and triglycerides are what lead to obesity as well. The body cannot metabolize fat without copper. Who's talking about that, right? And then the lower levels of cellular copper makes fat cells fatter by altering how they process their main metabolic fuels, such as fat and sugar. Copper helps increase the fat burning mechanisms, and it also helps regulate the iron in the blood, which is can be the root cause of oxidative stress, which we should get into next time we get together, Rick. And then the other one is the accelerated keto. So this is the one that flips you into ketosis within 30 minutes. So your body taps into its own fat stores, and you think, okay, now I've got energy. It increases ATP by 5 to 10 times within that 30 minutes. Your body now can rev up its metabolism because it's got an infinite amount of energy to burn on its body. And your brain says, I don't need to eat that fructose because I feel great on these fat stores that I'm burning. So the accelerated keto is a game changer for most people. And the last one I'm going to mention is the accelerated iodine. Unlike any other iodine out there, but uric acid buildup is partly due to the liver getting overloaded. And the accelerated iodine helps cleanse the liver and the blood, alleviating that liver backup caused by uric acid. And it increases metabolism and fat oxidation, helps with your thyroid health, and more people than ever have hypothyroidism because of the last 3 years. And it also helps reverse the damage done to the DNA by the spike protein. So those were a few that I just wanted to mention. But Rick, before we go, are we missing anything? And please let everybody know where they can get your book and find more about you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I like what your proposals there, your suggestions, and anything that can increase ATP in the cell is going to help block the craving. It's going to help block the addiction. And that's why, when you eat sugar, the more sugar you eat, the more you'll become addicted to it because it sets you up for that low energy state. And so the low energy state is really what drives food intake and addiction. And so, I think anything you can do, like the copper supplements and so forth, to try to improve the ATP level. Exercise also can stimulate ATP production. And I do recommend staying physically active and going for walks and doing those kinds of things and staying well hydrated. These will all help. Anyway, my book is called Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. I have a website, drrichardjohnson.com. My book can be, found on the, pretty much the Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes and Noble, and all those places. And I do hope that if you get a chance to read it, I think you'll see that there's a lot of insights into what causes obesity now that we didn't know about a few decades ago. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. There's a lot of aha moments in your book. And it's not just about eat less and exercise more. Yes, you need to do that, but there's a lot more to it. And why are you addicted to these foods? And why do you reach for it for quick energy when it's really stealing your energy? So Rick gets into all of that in his book. Highly, highly recommend it. And we will definitely have you back on because there's so much more to discuss between us. So thank you again, Rick. And thank you everyone else for joining us today. If I can help you, contact me directly through the website, sarabantahealth.com. Happy to put together a protocol for you. What did you learn today? Is this not crazy? Uric acid, the hidden weight loss issue, right? Leave a comment below if you're struggling with it, and join my free group coaching on Telegram. I will dive into this deeper and explain it even more, because you might be a little confused as something like uric acid causing your obesity. I teach you on that daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health, and you will be a part of a like-minded group to support you on your journey. The protocols and supplements I discussed are all found at sarabantahealth.com. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram under Accelerated Health Products, across over 100 channels under Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show. And if you like what you hear today, share with a friend and leave a comment below and subscribe so you get all of my new podcasts on Mondays and Tuesdays. Thanks again for joining us here, and have a great week.